Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
My guest today is Dr. David Hardy. Dr. Hardy is a doctor of chiropractic who has then gone on to develop a specialty in functional neurology. He has a vast experience in neurodegenerative disorders and neurodevelopmental disorders and has developed some very unique ways of improving cognitive performance and executive function. I think you'll find this interview very interesting as he brings out some really salient points that we don't often think about every day. So please enjoy this conversation that I have with Dr. David Hardy.
Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry. I have a great guest today who was very kind enough a few weeks ago to host me on his podcast. And so I had Dr. David Hardy. We're going to talk about brains and functional neurology. So thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited to be here and geek out with everyone and see where things take us.
So tell me and tell the audience how you got to this place of expertise and interest. What's the story?
Yeah, it's been a well, I didn't know it at the time, but a lifelong passion basically coming through. Growing up, I had speech issues, was in speech therapy, and then that kind of transformed into difficulties with reading and language arts. So that was kind of the struggle growing up. I was maybe a little bit of an oddball, and then I was found my way in sports, and then my first career was actually in teaching and education, and I taught in Australia, Japan, and I taught behavioral students here in Canada.
Wow.
And I loved it, and but I saw a shelf life to it, and at that point in time, I'm like, well, let's take kind of my passion in sports and change careers, and then I went into chiropractic. And went down to Atlanta and took my studies there at Life University. And I thought I could get partial scholarship by playing rugby, but I tore my pec minor off and struggled through a season and then hung up the boots. And it was one of the best things ever because then I found these postdoctorate courses in functional neurology. So in between all that classwork, I was taking seminars with people out in the field doing this work. And was also like really lucky to be in the hotbed of it at that moment in time because the lead doctor was treating all the star NHL players like Sidney Crosby and all sorts of other athletes and neurologic conditions and just hitting grand slams with it. Like he got Sid back on the ice. It was really just improving the lives of all these patients. And I got hooked on it. And finally, I'm like, well, I need to get myself checked out. I'm doing fine. I'm athletic. I'm doing well in school. I'm graduated cum laude, but wasn't doing it smoothly, I thought anyways. A lot of anxiety with it. And I went in, got checked out, and it was more for performance. And the doc that I saw gave me these silly little exercises based on what he found neurologically with me during the neuro examination.
Right.
And I'm doing them in between classes, like in the hallway or outside where no one can see me. And I'm doing them every hour, like he instructed me to, for like 3-5 minutes. And on day 3, it was like a light switch flipped in my brain. Like
Okay.
the frequency of how my brain was firing and working just automatically changed and flipped. And I felt this wave of calm hit me that I'd never experienced in my life ever before.
Okay.
And the other bizarre thing was my vision went crisper, clearer, and brighter. Not acuity wise, but like things were just brighter. And I realized there that my brain was just dulled down compared to where it could be. And it was one of those instantaneous transformations that you feel that hits you. And yeah, I've been at it ever since. And I see this like with concussion patients, that you reach this threshold where things just change how they're firing, and people walk away with this, whoa, what just happened moment.
Right.
And their brains are back to firing at almost the normal rate, or the way it should be. And it's going to be degrees different in one person to the other, but it's really just been a journey now to chase that and to get people to experience it and get their lives back, or to perform better, regardless of what condition they have or don't have. It's all about that performance and how the brain's working and firing. That is just absolutely amazing. And it is, I've watched it.
I've got one comment and one question. All right. So before I ask the question, I want to comment because I experienced a very similar thing after some sessions with transcranial magnetic stimulation to improve executive function. And it was like you described, the energy or whatever was going on. I had crisper vision. It was very noticeable, almost to the point where it's like, wow, this is pretty crazy. But that's an interesting phenomenon. But what kind of exercises was it that the functional neurologist gave you to do?
Yeah, with these ones, it was different complex movements. So with that, you're working on the cerebellum, which is, it's roughly about half the neurons in your brain.
Okay.
And so coordination exercises are so key. But they were all left-sided. So we were targeting right brain, and then we were doing quick head movements to get the vestibular stimulation in as well.
Okay.
And different eye movements at the same time. So it was coupling several different kind of pathways in the brain, but all focused on, once again, kind of how that part of my primitive brain was not firing properly up into mainly kind of the right frontal lobe. So left cerebellar, right frontal lobe type exercises using eye movements, coordination, balance, vestibular type exercises.
So is that kind of a foundational treatment that you work with your patients? That's one of the cornerstones. And I guess maybe we ought to talk about what is functional neurology. I think that would be good for the audience to know what it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely kind of the starting point. It's physical rehab for the brain. It's looking at how to fire all these different receptors, nerves, pathways to get the brain to exercise and improve at a whole new level. And it's very pinpoint. So everything's based off a neurologic examination. So it's going to be very individualized to each person as well. Because, you can see 1,000 concussion patients, and guess what? The next concussion patient is going to be different.
Okay.
Or same with them, same with cognitive decline, all of these conditions. They all have different kind of thresholds of what they can tolerate, and that changes daily in some conditions too. So with kind of the brain rehab field, you really do need to be able to read and react to the nervous system and to the modalities you're doing. It's not like regular exercise where you're exercising a muscle, and it is that no pain, no gain mentality.
Right.
But with the brain, you do too much, then you've overstimulated somebody and you have the opposite effect. And that can happen really quickly. So if you're not in tune with what's going on with the neurology of the person in front of you, then the therapies just aren't going to work as well. A lot of people try to cookie cut these rehabilitation exercises and put them into protocols, and those are only guides.
Okay.
The real guide there and expertise is to be able to, once again, read and react to how the person's doing right in front of you that moment of time you're working with them.
Now, I would imagine this isn't a static situation either, because as people start the pathway with you and start these exercises, then you may have to change. Just like with physical exercise, sometimes you have to hit different muscles or with different techniques, that type of thing, to evolve with the patient or with the client, if it's an exercise physiology situation or something like that.
Right, absolutely.
So take me through the process. I mean, I would imagine that, let's say someone has some sequela post-concussion. How would you take them through the process of trying to bring them back to their maximal capabilities?
Yeah, great question. And the first is that, and in consultation, of course, kind of just talk and have that conversation, what happened and what they're feeling, what they're going through, and really empathize with that person, because these conditions, they're maddening, and it can be very debilitating for people. And then the first part of the process to actually get in and look at how things are functioning is going to be that neurologic examination. And there's textbooks on the neuro examination. Most of the time, though, it's used for pathology, for diagnosing something.
Right.
Well, the way we're using it in functional neurology is kind of a roadmap of how the brain is working and looking at the subtleties of one pathway versus the other to kind of hone in on what part of the brain we need to exercise. And it's different than kind of the old approaches with rehabilitation that have been built on techniques. And these techniques, some go thousands years back, right? Whether it's aromatherapy, acupuncture, chiropractic, physical therapy, exercises, light stimulation, sound stimulations, electric stimulation, all of these fire a different receptor that go through a different nerve and to different parts of the brain. So we're working backwards there. We're figuring out which part of the brain isn't working properly and then matching it up with the modalities, exercises, and treatments to get somebody better. Versus, okay, well, here's the condition. Let's go through these steps and see if it makes you better. We're going the opposite way. We're trying to figure out, okay, no, it's an issue with the left cerebellum, or it's a problem in the right dopaminergic system, or it's kind of this axis here, or it's a combination. And then we're able to get way more precise with all these tools in the toolbox that's out there.
So you're having to mix multiple modalities. You mentioned light therapy, sound. What are some of the usual ones that would be the cornerstones of a treatment path for your average post-concussion person, let's say? I know,
right.
Yeah, pigeonhole. I know there's a lot of individuality, but just for general, framework and understanding.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at some of the symptoms. Let's look at balance issues. So a football player gets knocked and he tries to get up and his balance is off.
Right.
He's not coordinated. He can't walk well and he's dazed, confused. So right there, that's telling us, that system in his brain got twisted, torqued, jostled, knocked about, and needs to be fixed. And they can recover somewhat on their own, but studies have been done, and these athletes once they've had one or two head knocks, they start to lose performance and they're more prone to lower leg injuries after this, after a head knock.
Interesting.
And that's because the system's not firing as quick and robustly as it does when they've trained it for decades to perform at that level. So even in an athlete who looks like he's been doing well, you need to get really precise and get in there and see, okay, well, no, now there's a little bit of tendency for him to kind of fall a little bit when he's running in one direction, which is going to torque his muscles and joints differently, and he's not going to be able to react as well. So right there, we need to look at different coordination and balance exercises to kind of pinpoint that and get his brain to recognize where he is standing and running and moving to more accurately and proficient. And then two, it's multimodality, because the three senses that keep us up on our feet, and as you know, is going to be vision, balance, our inner ear, and then proprioception, feedback from muscles and joints.
Right.
So we need to look at the combination of all three of those and how they come together. So with that being said, we'll probably do different balance, complex, and eye exercises, either isolated or together. And then, we'll do that with reaction and speed exercises once they start to get even better.
This may be a little bit tangential, but when we're looking at brains and CNS physiology and CNS pathology, I think that, it's relatively easy for folks to understand, all right, if I have some type of a motor deficit, I have a paresis, or I have something like that. Clearly, that's a physical manifestation of the brain versus, let's say, a cognitive issue, which would be more of the mind. So
right.
You see where I'm going with that? Because what I want to know is...
and I want to nip that one right in the bud, right off the bat, is that let's classify what the brain and nervous system is. It's not a thinking organ. It is a sensory motor organ. If we go back to the basic diagrams of the brain, you've got your central sulcus, and everything in the posterior part of the brain is sensory information. Everything in the front part of the brain is motor. So what the brain does is it takes in information from our cells and from the outside world, and then it processes it. So right there, those are the primitive parts of the brain. And these are the parts of the brain that are the major nuclei to produce serotonin and dopamine. And then those parts of the brain, they fire up into the limbic centers. And then eventually that information, after even more processing, gets to our cognitive awareness centers. And then they fire back down.
Okay.
So the brain takes in information, processes it, and it has an output. And all of this sensory processing leads to our thoughts, leads to our emotions, lead to our actions. And like if we look at the basal ganglia and the dopaminergic parts of the brain, these loops are intertwined, that there's an emotional component to movement. There's emotional component to feel, to touch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also thinking. That is a motor aspect. Thinking is about do something, don't do something. The decision-making process is actually evolved from a movement process. So all of these parts of the brain that we think of being primitive or that don't affect cognition and thought or emotions is absolutely bunk science. It's how we've labeled things in textbooks just to make it easier to learn things and to compartmentalize things. But it goes so far away from how the brain actually works and how it's evolved and turned into this amazing thing that we have right now. And another example I use of this is I used to do cognitive testing just to see where different cognitive functions were at. Do the physical rehab with the brain, never do a cognitive task in the training, and see the cognitive scores improve. So it's just powerful what these systems are meant to do and how they fire into our thinking and feeling centers as well.
Now say that again, because I think you just said something that not only is very eloquent, but very important. And that is, you're saying that a lot of these, let's call it, for lack of a better word, the physical manifestations of the brain, let's say auditory, for example, can have...
Right.
So we know that music has an incredible amount of emotional aspects, right? So
yes,
give somebody some music therapy, and the next thing you know, they're physically crying, and not necessarily unhappy. But it's something where we have a physical thing going into the brain, creating an emotional output.
Absolutely.
So you're saying, that by upregulating these, and I apologize if I'm using the wrong terminology, but you're upregulating these physical processes of the brain. Let's say balance, for example, right? That's clearly a motor phenomena. But by improving that with these rehabilitative exercises, you actually then by extension saw improvements in cognitive or executive function without ever even playing with anything that was dealing with that.
All the time.
That's pretty incredible, really.
It's amazing. Yeah. And the research is backing this up, and it's starting to come out more and more on this. But yeah, clinically, that is what we would constantly see with this. And I use the example with balance there. How well do you think if I spun you around made you dizzy?
What? I would think of just trying not to fall down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So what we call it in neurology is resourcing. So kind of how the brain resources its energy and how it can focus is based on how much it needs to spend time to do these primitive functions that should be autonomic to us.
Right.
So if we have to think about not falling down, we're not going to have the capacity to think well. And emotionally too, if we're unsteady, all those signals are getting sent up to our emotional lobes telling us something's not right here. I'm going to fall over, or I don't feel steady. And there is a high correlation between anxiety and people who have like fear of heights or have sensory issues in supermarkets or in busy public places. And we like to diagnose it at a certain point in time. But what I really want to kind of stress with people listening is that it's all on a spectrum of pathology to performance. That, there is no one-stop area where all of a sudden things are bad. It's this continuum of where are you on the performance spectrum? And it depends on which part of the brain is working well and how the brain compensates for things as well. But if we wanted to make it efficient and function the best that it can and up to your innate potential, then we need to dive in deeper with these. And that's where we're at is, okay, well, why can you come on a show and start saying that, you've seen this disorder, and you're doing the same sorts of treatments? And it's like, well, we're looking at which parts of the brain aren't firing well versus what its named symptom is.
Right.
And I think that's the exciting part of how brain's developing and how brain health is developing clinically, and two, like multidisciplinary, because there's all sorts of different professions out there that are now making claims about how they improve brain health and performance.
Right.
And all of it goes back to they've got tools that impact the nervous system and make a change. So let's get even more precise and collaborate and see where this field starts to go, because there's so many people out there that are in need of help or that want that extra level of performance, like you mentioned with your transcranial magnetic stimulation as well.
So I think you're making a very important point. I mean, I remember 30, 40 years ago when we were taking, the traditional physiology, and when it came to, the brain, everything was tried to be made very discrete. This center was responsible for this other center was responsible for this, and the two don't mix. And we know that is not the case whatsoever.
Right.
And you can see that with different types of imaging, functional MRIs and DTI and SPECT imaging. And, so we know that really isn't the case anymore. So I think what you're saying has a tremendous amount of merit, because what you're saying is like, all right, if I can make somebody's vestibular system better, that's going to play a role not only in balance, but likely in other areas of the brain because of this interconnectedness of it.
Exactly. Absolutely. And balance, we've gone through a few times. If I was to ask the question, and leading question here, of course, is what is the most heavy myelinated, so that coating around nerves and spinal cord, heavy myelinated, fastest, quickest pathway in the human nervous system? I mean, most people wouldn't get this, but it's balance.
Right.
And two, the brain develops basically from the midline outwards and from bottom to top. So once one part of the brain develops, then another part kind of comes online. Mm-hmm. So we've got these basic kind of oscillations from these first to develop systems in the brain that then other systems build on top of. And if we looked at it then more from a brainwave activity, different frequencies of firing and rhythms and kind of the orchestra of the brain, we need to go to those baseline kind of rhythms and oscillations that should naturally occur as well. And those are going to be mainly kind of the reflexive systems in the brain that develop first, and the autonomic parts of the brain. And then, of course, that builds onto up until we get to the amazing cognition that we've got as human beings.
Right.
That no animal on Earth is able to obtain.
Well, it depends which humans we're looking at.
Right.
I can make an argument. All right, so let's go to balance for a second, because I think it's really interesting that it's something that is done almost every waking minute. I mean, there's constantly some signal, like just standing, for example, just to keep you from falling over. There's all these different muscular patterns that are being fired just about, and you never really even think about it. So it's kind of one of those things you don't recognize until it's gone or it's impaired.
And now a message from our sponsor. Well, folks, if you're over 40 and you're not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really rethink that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention the cardioprotection. Nitric oxide is a physiological molecule that does so many things for your health. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, just go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I am certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but for all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see that nearly every one of them will be deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them on it immediately. Now, thanks to approved medical solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. Thanks for watching. You can start today.
Absolutely. And two, out of all the senses that we have, and going back to the brain being a sensory motor organ, we take in information from the receptor, nerve, spinal cord, or cranial nerve into the brain. And that builds the oscillations of the brain. So most of these oscillations are built or firing basically from sensory stimulation from the universe around us and from inside of us, from these receptors. And we think vision, we're so visually dominant, but we close our eyes, and especially as we sleep, no visual input is put into the brain.
Right.
But the only sense that fires 24/7 and never quits is the sensation from gravity. And this goes into all the zero gravity studies that NASA and other agencies have done on brain health too, and what happens to people when they go into space and don't have this stimulation from gravity, is that gravity is really kind of where we're rooted and based first in our brain and nervous system when it comes to stimulation, setting these oscillations and brainwave patterns. And that becomes exciting from kind of, well, a spiritual perspective down to a rehabilitation perspective as well, is that we're really just this vessel for all the information coming in from all around us. And then we've got the capability to think, feel, and adapt to it. And we can take that into different avenues.
I've got that brings up a lot of questions in my mind, because you don't really think about gravity until you're falling off of the roof. But what did they find? What did they find from the standpoint? Did like a decreased gravitational force in the folks out on the space station or whatever, were they more likely to have some type of an executive impairment or neurocognitive impairment or emotional impairment, for lack of a better way, or did they even look at that?
All of the above. Yeah. All of those are coming up. There's a limited amount of time brain-wise as well that you can spend up there right now. And yeah, we think about it as muscles deteriorating, but yeah, it's also brain deteriorating from that lack of feedback. And then to put that in a longevity perspective, yeah, brains start to kind of decline at the same time muscle mass declines as well. So there is that huge connection between the two. And not in all cases, of course, but kind of a general pattern is that's what occurs. And then two, what they found, or one of the symptoms that astronauts report, is that their vision actually increases, but that's one of the stimulations that they still have. So when one sense kind of gets taken away, then other senses can kind of start to creep into other parts of the brain and become more heightened. But there's a limited amount that can happen, because we're multisensory beings. We need all these senses to be working together, and all this feedback from how we actually developed from a little single cell organism to where we're at now. So it does root us into kind of that perspective of how life has moved, evolved, and how we're a part of this amazing entity.
So let me ask you this question about the visual cortex, the occipital cortex. I have heard, I don't know that this is true, but I have heard that the reason we have REM sleep is so that there's a stimulus every 90 minutes or so to that occipital cortex to kind of keep it from going offline, for lack of a better way to put it. Is there any truth to that?
I would say there is, yeah.
Okay.
And then two, basically when we're sleeping, we're consolidating memories. We're trying to make sense out of and use all this information that's come into us all day and be able to use it in the future as well. So we're constantly remolding, remapping. And if we don't sleep, if these oscillations and different stages of sleep don't occur, then we don't have memories. And the other thing is, sleep is the only time we actually take care of our own body. We're not worried about the stimulation from the outside world. And we're starting to regenerate and go inward instead. And we see these in different brainwave activities. So our alert activities, which are going to be more high frequency brainwaves, gamma, down to our sleep delta waves, and kind of those brainwaves in between, that kind of sleep wake moment versus full alertness. All of them are different frequencies of brainwave activity, different energy, but some of the stimulations, and this is how we hack the brain, is going to change our brain state. So vision is very high activity, and that's going to raise our alertness. And then certain frequencies of light will kind of decrease our alertness. And same with sound frequencies and all these other things that we're using for physical rehabs, and also just to change our state, mood, function during the day.
So if I wanted to tune up my brain, I would think that you would definitely want to look at the cornerstones of health primarily first. If you have a patient who is not sleeping well, that would be one of the things that you would want to try to dial in. So, I mean, you have to look at their whole physiology and their whole habitology. What are they doing? What are they eating? What are they not eating? I mean, these are all really, I mean, you're kind of handcuffing yourself in this fight if you don't have somebody who's sleeping pretty well. So when a patient comes to you, you evaluate all of these things. Are there things that you do to try to program their sleep a little bit better? Because that's going to have huge benefits cognitively. I mean, you know that, well, no, I don't know. It's been proffered that you can decrease a student's performance by 40% by just depriving them of sleep the night before a test. I don't know how true that is, but I would think that it has a lot of merit to it, because I know when you don't get good sleep, you don't really think real well.
Exactly. And yeah, we need to look at sleep as well. And that is one way we can start to kind of hack the sleep, is with different frequencies of light, sounds. And we know that, yeah, there's different sounds or music that we're prone to if we want to calm down and relax. And then, of course, breathing is a huge one. Breathing exercises, and these go back to these ancient principles of breathwork, yoga, all these other things, is that the breathing centers, once again, are in that lower part of the brainstem.
Right.
And breathing's involuntary till we think about it. And this is one way we can use our cognition to hack into primitive centers, is that, yeah, we have this opportunity to be able to think, oh, I'm in this panicked hyperventilation state where I'm anxious and I'm awake. Okay, well, how do we slow that down? Well, breathwork is a great tool to do that, to slow down that heart rate that's already way too high, those thoughts that are just bombarding us and keeping us awake.
Right.
Yeah, we can do different breath work to calm that down. And by doing that too, yeah, we're getting oxygen, which is great for the brain and every cell in our body. But also we're firing into this primitive part of the brain that's going to be more associated with delta, rest, parasympathetic, all of these things that we know that are going to lead to a deep, relaxed sleep where we recover, we form memories, and our body is now able the next day to do what it's supposed to do.
I think breathing is something that most everyone does, hopefully. And most
we
everyone,
need to,
yeah. And most everyone doesn't even really think about it until you start getting into some type of a breath work program. And to go from the relationship of breath work to cognition, or at least whatever's going on in the mind. I mean, I've heard people talk about Wim Hof and all of his deep breathing, and they're almost able to get into like this absolute psychedelic state without any type of drug or agent. So clearly it can play a huge role in how the brain's functioning. I mean, we know that. I mean, after about 4 minutes of not breathing, there's not a lot of activity, but you see what I'm saying here.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I use the example, people always go to, well, what should I eat for brain health, or what should I eat to be physically fit? And then after that, they go, oh, yeah, I should be hydrated too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And maybe they think about breathing. But if you think about it, how long can a human being go without eating? Like months to years, right?
Right.
Like it's a long time until we die off from starvation. And then how long can we go without being hydrated? Well, days.
2 days. Maybe.
And then how little time does it take for somebody to pass away if they don't breathe? Right. So out of those three things, why are we concentrating on nutrition so much? Well, we should be, but shouldn't the base be breathing, since we need it way more than we need magnesium and calcium?
Right. Makes good sense. So I came across something the other day that I thought was very fascinating. There was an article about how the use of psilocybin may actually prevent the development of early onset Alzheimer's disease. I thought that was a really interesting observation. I don't know if it's true or not, but I mean, I think from an empirical standpoint, if you increase connectivity in the brain, you're making more of the neurons work or interact and bringing them back online. What's your thoughts on that? Do you have any opinion?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, more research is coming out on it, and articles I've read before that got me thinking was the stoned ape theory.
Yes.
That one of the reasons that humans might have a larger brain is that, they were in an environment where they were eating mushrooms, psilocybin, and all of a sudden something changed in the evolution there. And two, we look at all these substances kind of from a chemical space, but sometimes it's also the stimulation of the nervous system. And I'll go into another popular one, which is like dark chocolate or cacao, is that it's a bitter flavor. And it's not necessarily maybe the compounds in it that are healthy for us. A lot of healthy compounds, of course. But also what it does is it fires that taste receptor in the back of our tongue. And that's cranial nerve number 9, which fires into our lower brainstem. So it's also got this stimulation effect to it as well. And I can see that with psilocybin. It's not just the chemical aspect of it, but it's also basically how it stimulates the nervous system, and then the nervous system's firing and making those new connections and everything on top of it. So it is a combination of both the chemical and the stimulation side of this. And on top of all of this, we've been talking so much about wiring and pathways and everything else. But as you know, with the work you've done with neuropathy and tissues and trying to get tissues to heal up, is that, there is this metabolic and immune component to things. And the thing about the nervous system is, we do need to look at this more and more because there's so much immune dysregulation out there. But the brain and the cells, neurons, peripheral nerves, all of these, they're so metabolically demanding. Those cells work and die off so fast, so quickly, that they really need the immune system to clear away that debris and to work with tissues and healing, that a neuron needs to be supported by somewhere up to like 9 immune cells to help regulate it. And that becomes this immune neuro side of things as well. So, and the nutrition, metabolic, and all of these to make healthy living tissue that has been once again, the function destroyed and
Well, that
not working as well.
That brings up another, reflection on sleep, how the brain cleans itself through the lymphatic system, which I think if you looked in the textbooks 20 years ago, you would never even have found that word. So if you, right? I mean, but if you're unable to get enough deep sleep, that means you're not able to flush out all of the degenerative material from this apoptosis, these cells turning over that, it's kind of like just more and more dust on the floor of your apartment. It needs to be cleaned regularly. And I think again, that's another reason for really try to beat the drum for good sleep.
Oh, massively. Yeah. And we look at disorders, cognitive disorders. So we've looked at Alzheimer's being termed type 3 diabetes, and then 2 with Parkinson's. And one of the big terms out there, as you mentioned, is apoptosis and autophagy, right, in finding ways to recycle the tissue that's not being used properly. And yeah, that is going to happen more in sleep, because in sleep, once again, the body's not concerned about the outside world. It's concerned about healing and getting you better and improving the function for the next day so you can survive and do everything that you need to do. And it is such an important part to look at. And we're really ramped up in today's society that everything is about go, 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 go. And well, it's whipping a dead horse or a dying horse. Right. We're just driving it so far that things start to fall apart even more. And yeah, that rejuvenation, that healing, that recovery, that function occurs mainly when we're sleeping. And it needs to be a big part of it. But also during our day, we can't always be in this huge sympathetic drive and go, go, go. We need those rest periods.
Absolutely.
It is really, we're trying to sprint marathons. And
right,
the great thing now is too, that there's devices that are going to speed up this process. Instead of just working with hand tools, we're able to work with power tools now. Mm-hmm. And that may be good and bad depending on each person. But there are a lot of tech gadgets and devices that are going to speed up how we do fall into a different state and recover, and are able then to quickly get back into a go performance mode. And then that becomes the big puzzle for us professionals, is how do we hack our energy and our recovery times during our days so that we can sustainably live the peak performance lifestyles that us as professionals have to live.
So Dr. Hardy, I could spend literally hours with you, especially if I had a good glass of Cabernet, which I know is not great for brain health. But we'll probably have to get you back on, because there's some more questions that I want to ask about brains and whatnot. But before we jump off, how do people get a hold of you? Let's say somebody wants to get their brain dialed in. How do they get a hold of you? And I'll put it in the show notes as well. But why don't you share that info with us?
Oh, absolutely. Probably the best way is through my website, hardybrain.ca, or through LinkedIn.
Okay.
Constantly on LinkedIn. That's kind of my platform. So, and then the Hardy Brain, it's on Instagram, Facebook as well. I don't check those as much. So
very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate it, and look forward to having some more chats with you in the very near future.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is fun, and I look forward to hearing from other people here. So take care.
Several years ago, I chose Alpinion as my ultrasound brand of choice after years of experience and research into ultrasound imaging. In fact, I have 2 of their machines. Alpinion has incredible precision and penetration built into their technology that, in my opinion, is simply the best value in all of the ultrasound imaging space. They have several price points to meet your needs, and I can tell you definitively that you'll end up having to pay double to achieve the equivalent imaging quality from other top brands. That doesn't even account for the unlimited software updates and remote tech support included with no monthly fees. Right now, to show their appreciation for the listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, they're offering an incredible discount. Their portable i7 retails for $21,000, but you can get it discounted at most medical meetings for $19,000. But my listeners will get it discounted to $15,900. This has never been offered anywhere for the new portable system with the engine of a console system. Use code SBPOI to take advantage of this incredible offer. You won't be disappointed with Alpinion. I sure haven't been.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.